I heard it clearly over the string quartet. 3 words. Said the way you say something you've believed for years and stop bothering to hide. She deserves this. Not cruel, exactly. Worse than cruel, actually, said, with a kind of tired finality, like a verdict that had already been handed down. The woman who said it was standing near the bar, at the far end of the reception hall, leaning slightly toward another woman in a silver cocktail dress, both of them watching someone across the room. I followed their gaze without meaning to. That's when I saw her. She was standing alone near one of the tall windows that looked out over the harbor. Not hiding, exactly, but not quite in the room either. The way some people stand at parties when they've decided that being present is enough and they're not going to pretend otherwise. She had a glass of white wine she wasn't drinking, and she was looking out at the water with an expression I recognized immediately because I'd worn it myself more times than I'd like to admit. The expression of someone who came anyway. My name is Jack. I'm 31 years old. I work in urban planning for the city of Vancouver, and up until that Saturday evening in October, I would not have described myself as someone who crosses rooms. The event was a benefit gala for the Coastal Children's Foundation, one of those $300 a plate affairs held in the atrium of a renovated heritage building in Gastown, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs and local wine that costs more than my weekly groceries. My colleague Roberta had given me her ticket at the last minute because her kid had a hockey tournament in Kamloops. Go, network, eat something with truffle in it, she'd told me. You need to stop spending your Saturdays reorganizing your bookshelf. She wasn't wrong. I didn't know most of the people there. I knew a few faces from City Hall, a few more from various community consultations I'd sat through over the years. And I knew my own deep reluctance to make small talk with strangers about the real estate market. I'd been there 40 minutes, I'd eaten 2 pieces of charcuterie, and I was seriously considering whether anyone would notice if I left. That's when I heard it. She deserves this. I glanced at the 2 women. The one who'd spoken was somewhere in her mid-40s, polished in the particular way of someone who has worked hard to appear effortless. Highlighted hair, structured blazer, the kind of earrings that are statement pieces without being gaudy. She looked like she could chair a committee. The woman beside her followed her gaze, and then, quietly, said, "She's always been like that, too sensitive. You can't help someone who won't help themselves." I'm not proud of what I did next, which was stand there and listen for another 30 seconds instead of walking away. But I listened, and what I heard was a fairly comprehensive character assassination delivered in undertones, with the pleasant, reasonable tone of 2 people discussing the weather. The woman by the window had apparently recently gone through a divorce. She had apparently made certain choices that her family had warned her against. She had apparently embarrassed people. The word finally appeared at least twice. In the sentence, it's finally caught up with her, and once in the sentence, finally she'll have to figure it out on her own. I put down my glass of Okanagan Pinot Gris. Here's the thing about me and parties. I don't love them. I'm not particularly smooth. I don't have a repertoire of opening lines, and I've never once in my life walked up to a stranger and introduced myself without some kind of practical reason. Work function, neighborhood meeting, shared elevator that went on too long. I'm the kind of person who rehearses what he's going to say to the barista and still somehow ends up saying, "You too," when they tell him to enjoy his coffee. But something about those 2 women and their quiet, thorough certainty made me feel something I hadn't expected to feel at a charity gala on a Saturday night in October. I walked across the room. She heard me coming, I think, or at least she registered that someone was approaching because she turned slightly away from the window and toward the room, straightening her shoulders in that small, almost invisible way people do when they're preparing for a social interaction they're not sure they want. She was about my age, maybe a year or 2 younger, with dark hair pinned up and a few pieces that had escaped, and were doing their own thing around her face. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress that she'd clearly dressed up for. She'd made an effort, which somehow made the whole thing worse, knowing what I'd just heard. "Hi," I said. She looked at me. Her eyes were the particular shade of brown that looks almost amber in warm light. She did not look immediately charmed by my opener. "Hi," she said. "I'm Jack?" Okay, that was it. That was what she gave me. I decided I respected it. "I'm going to be honest with you," I said, Because I think you look like someone who doesn't have a lot of patience for the alternative. She tilted her head slightly. That's a strange thing to say to someone you just met. I know. But I overheard something a few minutes ago that I've been thinking about since, and I thought, I don't know, that maybe you'd want someone to come stand by the window with you for a bit, if that's not weird. She looked at me for a long moment, not warmly, but not dismissively either. What did you overhear? Two women near the bar, I said. I'm not going to repeat it because it wasn't kind, and you probably already know what they think. I didn't want to be someone who heard it and didn't do anything. Something shifted in her expression, not softened exactly, more like she was recalibrating. That's my sister, she said, and her best friend. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to say. Which one was talking more? She asked. Your sister, she nodded, slowly, like that confirmed something she'd already suspected. Then she looked back out at the water. A container ship was moving slowly across the harbor, all lit up against the dark. I'm Audrey, she said. Jack, I said again, in case she'd missed it. I heard you the first time, Jack. Right. We stood there for a moment. The string quartet started something that I think was a Norah Jones arrangement, which felt either appropriate or ironic, depending on how you looked at it. Why did you come? I asked. Not trying to press anything. I was genuinely curious. Because my mother asked me to, Audrey said, and because I thought, I don't know, I thought if I just showed up and was normal, everyone would treat me like I was normal. And that would mean I was normal. She paused. That logic worked better in my head on the drive over. How long is the drive? 40 minutes from North Vanna. You drove 40 minutes to be normal at a charity gala. I took the C bus and then a cab, actually. So technically 45 minutes to be normal at a charity gala. She looked at me sideways. Worse when you say it out loud. I don't think it's worse, I said. I think it's kind of brave. She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. It really isn't. Can I tell you something? You're going to regardless. That one almost got me. I covered it badly. I've been divorced too, I said, 2 years ago. And there was a period of about 6 months where I convinced myself that if I could just seem okay in public, that meant I actually was okay. Like I could reverse engineer being fine. She turned to look at me properly for the first time. Did it work? No. But I got really good at dinner parties. She was quiet for a moment. Then what did work? Time, I said. And honestly, stopping performing recovery for other people and just actually doing it, which took longer. She turned back to the window. Your ex-wife? Ex-husband. She didn't miss a beat. Did his family do the thing where they all just quietly agreed it was your fault? Oh, fully, I said. His mother sent me a card. It said thinking of you on the front, which, points for ambiguity, laughed. A real one, surprised out of her. She tried to stop it and couldn't quite. I'm sorry, she said, still smiling a little. That's awful. It's fine. It's genuinely funny now. It wasn't for a while. She looked down at her glass of wine. Mine was a 7-year marriage that ended because he met someone at a work conference in Calgary and decided she was a better fit. Which, maybe, but the way everyone in my family talks about it, you'd think I'd committed some kind of fraud. You should have read the fine print, I said. She shot me a look. Sorry, I said. That came out wrong. I meant, people look for a reason. If it ended, someone has to have done something. The idea that sometimes things just end because they end is too unsettling. His family liked me, she said, which is somehow the worst part. They kept texting me for months. His mother still sends me a Christmas card. See, that's the variation that's almost harder. My ex's family didn't like me from the beginning, so at least I knew where I stood. You had clarity, she said. That's valuable. That's a generous reading. She almost smiled again. She kept catching herself doing it, like it was a habit she was in the process of breaking. A man I vaguely recognized from a city hall committee walked by and nodded at me. I nodded back. Audrey watched the exchange. Do you actually know people here? She asked. Not really. I have a colleague's ticket. She couldn't come, so you're also here under false pretenses vicariously, yes. What do you do? She asked. Urban planning? City of Vancouver. I paused. Which means I've spent 9 months in a public consultation process about a bike lane that approximately 800 people have very strong feelings about. I've been to one of those meetings, she said. Were you pro or anti? Pro, obviously. Then statistically you were outnumbered and the meeting ran 40 minutes over time. It ran 55 minutes over time, she said. And the man behind me had a thermos of coffee and was extremely committed to talking about property values. I've met that man, I said. I've met him at every single public consultation I've ever run. He has a different name each time, but he is always the same man. This time she laughed without catching herself. It changed her whole face. The wariness lifted for a moment, and something easier came through underneath it. I noticed across the room that her sister was watching us. She had that particular stillness of someone recalculating. I didn't say anything about it to Audrey. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. Why are you still here? You've been standing by this window for—" She checked her watch, which was the small, unfussy kind. 12 minutes. "You could have done your good deed and moved on." I thought about that. "Because you're interesting," I said, "and because I haven't talked to anyone at this party who made me forget to be bad at parties." She looked at me for a moment. "That's a strange thing to say. I know. You're not actually bad at parties." "I really am, normally. Ask my bookshelf. I reorganized it last Saturday instead of going to my friend's birthday. By subject or author, but then by publication date within the author, which, I know. That's not bad at parties," she said. "That's just particular. My ex would have said neurotic. Your ex sounds like he had a limited vocabulary." Something in my chest did a small, involuntary thing at that. I covered it by looking out at the harbor. The ship had moved further along. The lights on the North Shore were their usual beautiful winter-approaching blur. "There's a cafe on Granville Island," I said. "The one near the market, with the good cortados and the weird taxidermy on the wall." "Gibbons," she said immediately. Then caught herself. "I know every coffee shop in that neighborhood. It's not a character reference." I wasn't going to make it one. I paused. "I was going to ask if you wanted to have coffee there sometime, if that's something you'd be interested in." She was quiet for a moment. Not the polite pause before declining quiet. Something more considering. "You know nothing about me," she said. "I know you take the C-bus, you're pro-bike lane, you know every coffee shop on Granville Island, and you drove 45 minutes to be normal at a party, and you've spent 12 minutes being more interesting than anyone else here. 45 minutes to go to a party where my sister is quietly describing my divorce to strangers." "I'm not a stranger anymore," I said technically. She looked at me. "Jack, Audrey, this is—" she started. "I know," I said. "It's a weird way to meet someone. I was going to say it's a lot, that too." She looked down at her wine glass again. There was a pause long enough that I thought I'd misjudged the whole thing. The laughing, the easy back and forth, the way she'd stopped catching herself. I started assembling the graceful exit version of the conversation. Then she said, "I'm not ready for anything complicated." "Okay," I said. "And I'm still. It's only been 8 months, which I say sounds like enough time, but it isn't, for me." "Okay," I said again. "And coffee doesn't mean anything." "Coffee is just coffee," I agreed. She was quiet for another moment. "Gibbons has good cardamom buns." "I didn't know that." "Well." She finally took a sip of her wine. "Now you do." We stayed at the window for another half hour. Her sister drifted by once, with the practiced casualness of someone doing reconnaissance, and Audrey introduced me simply as Jack, a city planner, without explaining how we'd met or offering anything further. Her sister's name was Daphne, and she was perfectly pleasant in the way of someone who is perfectly pleasant when being observed. When the evening started to wind down and the auction paddles had been counted, and the string quartet was packing up, Audrey picked up her coat from the chair she'd left it on, and I walked with her as far as the door. "I'm getting a cab," she said. "I'll walk," I said. "I'm just over on Canby." In this rain? It had started to rain at some point while we were inside. The kind of Vancouver October rain that isn't dramatic, just thorough. The kind that soaks through your jacket before you notice it's wet. "I don't mind rain," I said. She looked at me like she was considering whether that was true or whether I was just saying it. Then she pulled out her phone. "Give me your number," she said. "I'll text you about Gibbons." I gave her my number. She put it in under the name Jack, City Hall, which I found out later, and considered a modest victory. She didn't text me that night. She didn't text me the next day either, and I went through the ordinary ritual of second-guessing every word I'd said until I was fairly certain the whole evening had been a disaster of my own construction. On Tuesday, she texted, "Saturday morning? Around 10? I texted back, "Works for me." She texted, "Don't reorganize anything on Friday night in preparation." I stared at that for a moment. Then I texted back, "Too late." She sent back a single laughing emoji, just the one, and then nothing else. I put my phone down and looked at my bookshelf, which I had in fact just reorganized. Gibbons was quieter than I expected for a Saturday morning, or maybe we were early enough that the market crowd hadn't arrived yet. The taxidermy was a beaver wearing a small hat, which Audrey pointed out immediately, and with great seriousness. "I always sit where I can see him," she said. "The beaver? His name is Gerald. You named the taxidermy beaver at a coffee shop." "I come here a lot," she said simply. "Gerald and I have an understanding. I ordered a cortado. She ordered a cardamom bun and an Americano and didn't ask whether I wanted to split the bun, just broke off a piece and put it on my saucer without ceremony, which was somehow the least complicated, generous thing anyone had done for me in a very long time. We talked for 2.5 hours, not about the divorce, not about Daphne, not about the gala. We talked about the city. She'd grown up in Burnaby, moved to North Van for the marriage, was considering whether to stay or go back. We talked about her job, which was landscape architecture, which meant she spent her days thinking about how people moved through public spaces, which meant we had approximately 40 years of shared professional grievances to work through. We talked about a hiking trail on the Sunshine Coast she'd done the previous August that she described with a specificity I found completely arresting. We talked about the bookshelf organization system, and she made a compelling counter-argument for subject first that I'm still thinking about. At some point, I noticed that she'd stopped checking her phone and stopped glancing toward the door. I didn't point it out. When we finally left, the lunch crowd had arrived and Gerald's corner had gotten crowded. She stood outside on the wet cobblestones and said, "This was good." "It was," I said. "I'm not." She started and then stopped. "I know," I said. "I was going to say I'm not good at this right now, whatever this is." "Neither am I said. "I'm also particular about my bookshelves. We've established that." She looked at me for a moment. The rain had held off just barely, and the light off the water was doing something nice. "There's a trail in Deep Cove," she said. "Not hard. Good views. I go sometimes when I need to be outside and not think too much." "Okay," I said. "I wasn't. That's not an invitation." "I know. I was just mentioning it." "You were just mentioning it," I agreed. She looked at me with an expression I was starting to be able to read. It was the expression of someone who had decided to find something funny but wasn't ready to admit it. "Next Saturday," she said. "Bring layers. It's colder than it looks up there." She walked away before I could respond, turning up her collar against the October air, her boots loud on the wet stones. I stood there for a moment watching her go. Then I got out my phone and looked up the Deep Cove Trail, because I was in fact particular about being prepared. We hiked the following Saturday, and the one after that. On the third Saturday, somewhere near the top of a ridge that looked out over Indian Arm, she stopped walking and said, without preamble, "I think Daphne was always waiting for the marriage to fail." I didn't say anything. "Not in a malicious way," Audrey said, which I thought was more generous than the situation warranted. I think she decided early on that I'd made a mistake, and then she just waited. And when it finally happened, she paused. It confirmed something she needed confirmed, that she'd been right all along. "What does she need to be right about?" I asked. Audrey was quiet for a moment, looking out at the water. "There was a heron on a rock below us, improbably still. I think she needed someone in the family to not have things work out," she said. And I drew the short straw. "That's a brutal thing to say about your sister." "Yes," she said, "it is." We stood there for a while. The heron didn't move. "My dad used to take me up here," she said finally, "before he got sick. We'd come in the fall when the maples were turning and he'd point out every single one like I'd never seen a maple before. Every year. How long ago did he pass?" 3 years. She paused. "He would have told me to stop going to parties I didn't want to go to. Sounds like a wise man." He was. She looked over at me. "He also would have said that standing by a window being miserable was a waste of a perfectly good view. Sound advice." "Yeah." She looked back at the water. "I don't know what I'm doing, Jack. With the hike? With any of this." I turned that over for a moment. "I think you're figuring it out," I said. "And I think figuring it out slowly and honestly is better than figuring it out fast and wrong." She didn't say anything. "Also," I said, "for what it's worth, I've been on 3 hikes in the past 3 weeks, which is 3 more hikes than I'd been on in the previous year. So something is working. She was quiet for another moment. Then she reached over and took my hand. Not the way you take someone's hand at the beginning of something, more like the way you reach for something you've decided you need. Steadier than that. Less uncertain. She didn't say anything about it. I didn't either. We stood there at the top of the ridge, looking out over the arm of the sea, and the heron finally lifted off the rock below us and opened its wings, and was for a moment the only thing moving in all that stillness. Audrey's hand was warm. I held on.